Hello, this is Dr. Lynn McCool, and in this screencast I will introduce Module 4, Communicating Visually, and your Assignment 4, Persuasive Letter and Infographic. Well, first let's take a look at some statistics about why infographics work and more specifically, why visuals are so important to our communication. You see, everyone has a message, but the hard part is bundling it up so that the message is understood by anyone and everyone. Wix Marketing has gathered together some really interesting statistics. According to Nielsen 2008, on average, users only read 28% of the words per visit to any website. Also, only 20% is all that is ever remembered after just reading text. However, 90% of all information transmitted to our brains is visual. So researchers have found that color visuals increase the willingness to read by 80%. We also receive 5 times the amount of information every day that we did in 1986. Humans get a sense of a visual scene in less than 1/10 of a second, and we consume 34 gigabytes, that's 100,500,000 words outside of work on an average day. And so 200% more images are liked on social media than text. Marketers see a 12% average increase in traffic after publishing an infographic. So we can see with just these few statistics right here how impactful visuals really are, not only to persuasion, but also just our full consumption of them. So we are a fully visual culture, and we are consuming visuals all the time. Well, in Assignment 4, you get a chance to create an infographic. And an infographic's purpose is to tell a story using visuals and text that informs and persuades an audience to either believe or do something. And I want to give you some historical examples of very interesting visuals that were created at a time when there was no computer software or any kind of fancy graphic design tools, just the artist's eye and the ability to create a drawing. But those drawings were used in a way to change public opinion and also to influence behavior. So let's take a look at some historic visuals from the 1800s. So I want to first talk about an epidemiologist by the name of Dr. John Snow and his role in the 1854 cholera outbreak and the map of London, and what those three things have in common. Well, in September of 1854, there was a cholera outbreak that was centered in the Soho district in London that was close to Snow's house. And so, being a scientist and an epidemiologist, Snow decided to map all of the different places where there had been death attributed to cholera. And as he was doing that, he also mapped the 13 public wells in all of the area surrounding the Soho district. And what he started to notice was that there was a spatial clustering of cases around one particular water pump on the southwest corner of the intersection of Broad, which is now called Broadwick Street, and Cambridge, which is now called Lexington Street. He examined the water samples from the various wells under a microscope and confirmed the presence of an unknown bacterium in the Broad Street samples. Despite strong skepticism from local authorities, he had the pump handle removed from the Broad Street pump, and the outbreak quickly subsided. So now I'm going to zoom in on this little area on the map, because you can see that there are these little black bars, and each one of these bars represented a death within a household. So if we zoom in, we can see here's the Broad Street pump, and we can see that the number of deaths surrounding this location are higher than the deaths as it gets farther and farther away from the radius of the pump. So Snow subsequently published this map of the epidemic to support his theory, and you can locate a complete map that shows the locations of all the 13 public wells in this particular Soho district. But you can also see the 575 cholera deaths mapped onto the street map there by home address, and those are signified by the little black bars. So every black bar represents one human death. Well, Dr. Snow was not the only one to harness the power of data visualization. Another very famous figure from this time period, Florence Nightingale, also learned the power of data visualization. In 1854, under the authorization of Sidney Herbert, the Secretary of War, Florence Nightingale brought a team of 38 volunteer nurses to care for British soldiers fighting in the Crimean War, which was intended to limit Russian expansion into Europe. Nightingale and her nurses arrived at the military hospital in Scutari and found soldiers wounded and dying amid horrifying sanitary conditions. 10 times more soldiers were dying of diseases such as typhus, typhoid, cholera, and dysentery than from battle wounds. Nightingale's work brought the field of public health to national attention. She was one of the first in Europe to grasp the principles of the new science of statistics and to apply it to military and later civilian hospitals. This is the famous diagram that Nightingale drew to showcase the causes of mortality in the army in the East, there in the Crimean. And in her legend, the blue color represents death from preventable diseases, red represents death from battle wounds, and then black is disease from all other causes. Now it's kind of interesting because oftentimes biographies and stories about Florence Nightingale usually picture her as an angelic nurse tending to British soldiers in the military hospitals during the Crimean. However, although Nightingale was indeed very compassionate towards soldiers, she was also an administrator, an advocate for the common man, the common soldier, and a proponent of the use of statistics and information design. And this visual shows what is now called Nightingale's Rose diagrams, which she designed following her service as the director of nurses at the field hospital in the Crimean War. When the war ended, Nightingale was asked by the Queen to write a report on the poor sanitary conditions and make recommendations for reform. When, after 6 months, the government did not act on the reforms, Nightingale decided to write an annex to the report in which she would include this invention, her Rose diagram. And it was because of this that Nightingale's ultimate success in persuading the government to institute reforms was a result of this illustration. The power of this visual was very strong, and it was an example of Nightingale's own passionate resolve to right what she saw was a grievous wrong. So this visual actually helped to change the course of history and ultimately helped to change the course of medical science and epidemiology, in that it forced those who were in power to pay attention to the sanitary conditions of the hospitals. So let me ask this question. If much of the information we process on a daily basis comes in visual form, wouldn't it make sense to improve our visual communication skill set? And of course, that's a rhetorical question, and we know that the answer is yes. And that's exactly what this assignment is designed to do. It's designed to help you to improve your visual communication. So in this particular assignment then, your case study prompt is that your company, Collegiate Marketing Solutions, has been contacted by Drake University Admissions Office, which is looking for promotional materials that portray the university in a positive light and that may be used for recruiting prospective students. So what you're going to do is use Drake's common data set, and you can download that from Blackboard, and then choose one little slice or section of data to analyze, visualize, and then explain to prospective students and any other audience members that you think are pertinent for this particular project. In addition to the infographic that you'll design with that data, you'll also be writing a persuasive letter to the director of Drake Admissions. And in that letter, you'll want to explain how you use the data set and how it would be attractive to a prospective student. You want to describe your design choices for your infographic and then justify how and why admissions should use your infographic. Okay, so let's begin decoding the prompt and the directions. Your company is Collegiate Marketing Solutions. They've been contacted by Drake University Admissions. Drake is looking for promotional materials that portray the university in a positive light and may be used for recruiting. And of course, you're going to be using Drake's common data set. I think we'll be using our most current one, the 2019-2020 data set that's downloadable from Blackboard. You're going to choose one section of that data to analyze, visualize, and explain. So here's our C-mapped analysis for you to consider and think through. First, in analyzing the context, let's ask about the background. What needs are there? What problems should be solved? Who are your persons or person of contact? In thinking about your audiences, who is your primary, your secondary, watchdog, and gatekeeper audiences? What are each of their needs? And how would they be affected by the visual display of your chosen data set? Next, you want to analyze the message. Is it neutral, positive, or a negative message? Well, the prompt tells you that you are to portray the university in a positive light because this is a marketing piece. You want to determine your purpose. Is it informational, instructional, or persuasive? Well, although you are giving information and may even provide some instruction, it is mostly a persuasive message. It's a sales message. You want to consider your document genre. Well, you have two different genres you're working with here, the infographic and the letter genre. So before you come to lab this week, you want to download that 2019-2020 Drake Common Dataset from the assignment on Blackboard and read through that, look through that, and then find a small portion of data that you would like to visualize. Take that data, work through that C-mapped analysis as you're choosing your data and composing your infographic. Remember that you want to narrow your data set so that it can be easily visualized on just one side of an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. If you find that in your design process that your design is getting longer and longer and longer, then you're working with too much data. So you really want to narrow down your data set. Next, you want to determine the story you want to tell with this data. And in order to find stories in the data, you need to focus on the topic, simplify the data on that topic, and convert numbers to simple units. Look for relationships and even changes perhaps over time. And then process the data so that you can find more stories and then begin to build a story that includes a human element to the data, because numbers by themselves are not as persuasive as numbers that are paired with some sort of human element. So we want to think about, from a human perspective, what does the data tell us?